When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Allie Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Hello, welcome to Season 3, Episode 5 of the Insatiable podcast, Natural Fertility for Pregnancy, Menopause, and Post-Menopause with Erin Borbet. Guys, this was a fantastic episode, if I don't say so myself. I wanted to have Erin on because she's an acupuncturist and a doula, and so she can really look at things from a holistic, integrative perspective. Isn't it great when you can go to someone and they know what you need nutritionally, emotionally, and if you need to check in spiritually? That's Erin. And she really brought this really dynamic, holistic perspective to our talk today. What I really want you to pay attention to is what she talks about in terms of how to prep your body for fertility, including that you just can't turn it on and off, and how important it is for all of us, no matter if we are in the childbearing years, going through the transition of perimenopause to menopause, and even post-menopause. It's still so important to understand your own cycles and rhythms. And I know with a lot of my clients, and myself included, trusting our own timing and getting in cycle with not always being productive and not always judging if we're ahead or behind is really, really challenging. And Erin's going to help us figure out that today, or talk about that and ways to think about it. We also get a lot into the nutrition that needs to happen and how that can change. And even as you go through menopause, your nutritional needs might change. So paying attention to that. And lastly, I just loved the holistic perspective. We really dived into the emotional stuff and how a lot of women around fertility and menopause, and especially what can come up as we're transitioning through menopause, a lot of times we tend to isolate ourselves. And Erin has a really important points about building community and reaching out, and especially the type of people that you want to reach out to. So I hope this episode helps you no matter where you are in your fertility cycle. Let me tell you a little bit more about Erin and this wonderful offer that she has for people. She is a transformational health coach, has her master's in Chinese medicine, and she's board certified in Chinese herbal medicine too, and is a certified women's herbal educator. She helps women with their hormonal symptoms, and she maintains a clinical practice in Victor, Idaho, as well as remote coaching where she works one-on-one with clients. She has trained all over the world. The prestigious Zhejiang Hospital in China, NYU Medical Center, the VA Hospital, Lutheran Medical Center in Brooklyn, the Berkeley Center for Reproductive Wellness, New York Fertility Services, and 7 years in private practice in New York City. So she really has a global perspective as well as a holistic one. And one of the great things about Erin is you can schedule a complimentary 30-minute phone consultation with her at Erin Borbet, ErinBorbet.com. And we will have all of her information and ways to connect, of course, at the show notes at allieshapiro.com/podcast. Enjoy today's episode, and just remember as well that I just launched my brand new site. One of my clients said it was a feast for the eyes and the mind. I love that. Can't think of a higher compliment. Beauty and intellectual stimulation. But remember, if you want to learn what your eating habits say about you, I've got a short quiz that you'll figure out, and you'll start to get tools right away to get unstuck rather than stressed in eating. So check that out at allieshapiro.com. Now on to this fantastic episode. Erin, thank you so much for coming on Insatiable today. I'm so excited for people to get your holistic perspective on fertility. Given our season 3 theme is renewal, I mean, what more can we talk about? I mean, what's more appropriate than fertility, right?
Yeah, new growth.
Oh, I love that. That's part of why I wanted to have you on. You see the metaphors of this. So there's a lot of reasons. First of all, your expertise and your experience, but one of the things that as I work with younger clients, the millennials or even my older clients, well, I shouldn't say older, but in, late 30s, 40s who want to have children, or people who are even done having children, fertility, it's kind of this thing that people just try to turn on, right? And then also only see it through childbirth. But there's many layers to this. And so I would love to get just kind of your overall big picture view of fertility, of new growth, as you would say.
Yeah, you're so right on that there are so many layers of it, and that I completely agree with you that I feel like what has happened is it has become something that we try and turn on when we want to have a baby, and then turn off again, and maybe turn it on for a second baby, and then turn it off, and then, keep it on snooze. And there's for our lives. And I see it. Yeah. And I see it, I see that disconnection cause struggle for a lot of women. Certainly, that disconnection, and then whether you're on birth control or whatever you're doing that has disconnected you from your fertility, and then you want to turn it on and get pregnant and are maybe having trouble, that's a struggle for sure. But even after you've had your babies, and then, turning it off again, and if there's, symptoms surrounding your cycle, or your cycle is a nuisance, or perhaps there's even, real, dysfunction that is extremely impacting your quality of life, different things. And then that phase gets jumped to conclusions too, where I'm seeing women with, hysterectomies at fairly young ages after they've had their babies, and, all of this affects the rest of their lives, and, their menopause transition, and all of that. So to me, yes, fertility is so much more than having a baby.
Yeah. So tell me, I would love for you to kind of almost like a side by side, like how does Western medicine view fertility? And then how do you take it as a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner and a transformational health coach?
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like Western medicine views fertility very similarly to how it views most things that are happening in the body. Like, where is the problem and how can we fix it? So it's a little bit more, test-oriented, blood test, sonograms, there's a million different tests, hysterosalpinograms, like a ton of different things to try and find. So if a woman is having trouble getting pregnant, they can do all these tests to see if they can find the source. An unfortunate thing that's happening today is this diagnosis of unexplained infertility. So even with all of these tests, everything coming back normal, and a woman still finding it, not possible to get pregnant easily on her own. And that is very frustrating. The other thing that can be frustrating about Western medicine, I've found, is that through this testing, there isn't always an easy remedy. So when we do blood tests specifically, and let's say someone is testing and they have elevated FSH levels on day 3 of their cycle, or they have low AMH levels, both that would indicate, diminished ovarian reserve, as they call it, which can impact fertility. There's not really anything to take, there's not a medicine to take to increase your AMH or decrease your FSH, but there, ways to kind of speed up the process is more the thought behind it. I'm not a medical doctor, but what I've seen seems the thought is that, okay, well, if we just get this woman pregnant faster by stimulating her ovaries, by doing IVF, by doing these interventions, then we have a better chance because we're, running against the clock kind of thing. But it's not actually treating the imbalance that they found.
Well, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about when we look at these numbers, we forget that they're static, or that they're not static, right? You're getting one data point from one point in time. And I think that's one thing that's so interesting about fertility and birth and women's health in general. It's just been neglected in terms of studying it. And so we have these ideas that, I always think about 100 years ago, they had these certain health ideas. And now we're like, can you believe they believe that? And I'm always like, what are they going to think about us in 100 years if humans are still around, right? If the earth doesn't antibiotic us before that, that's what I think is happening with the climate crisis. It's like, we're going to just antibiotic you guys. You're not helping the ecosystem. But I always think what are they going to think about? I remember in the Atlantic, there was a study, an article, maybe 5 or 7 years ago, saying that the ideas that we have about how women's fertility are based on 16th century French women, right? That was the last time that they've actually really understood how long women can get pregnant and whatnot. And so when you talk about that, I think that's so fascinating, because if you're someone who goes and gets tested and it's oh, I have this high FSH level, I have low reserves, and the doctors will tell you there's nothing we can do. This is how it is. And are you saying that you can change your egg reserve, that you can? Like, I'd be curious what your perspective is on that.
Absolutely. Well, no, you cannot change your ovarian reserve. You are born with all the eggs that you will ever have in your ovaries. There's nothing anyone can do to change that. What we can do is change the quality of the eggs that are there, which essentially, translates to increasing circulation, increasing nutrient density in the blood so that there's good nutrition getting to the ovaries and reducing inflammation. It's, very simple, kind of similar to treating most other, whatever you're dealing with, illness of other kinds. It's just a more concentrated focus to the ovaries. And there is some, recognition that like elevated FSH is diminished ovarian reserve, but it can also be attributed to diminished ovarian quality. And we know this because you can see women that change their diets, that get acupuncture, that do myo-abdominal massage, that take herbs, that are really like taking an active approach to change the landscape of ovarian quality and their ovarian health. These FSH numbers go down. Right? And back into normal range or near it. And so we know we can't affect the number of eggs, so we must be affecting quality. And that to me, is so exciting because you actually have a lot more control than you think you have.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so exciting. Because it only takes, for people who want to get pregnant or whatever, and I know we're focusing on the pregnancy aspect of fertility, but it only takes one. Like you don't need all, like it's not a percentage. And I know that there's lower percentages or whatever, but to know that we can have some control, I think, or at least a chance, right? I wouldn't say control, I would say choices, than just to rush through the process. Because as someone who's gone through chemotherapy and has healed their gut, but has been through a lot medically, I would be someone who's very slow to like want to do more like IVF type of stuff. And I know that everyone's different, right? I'm bringing a different context to the situation. To know that there's more time and more chances is like really empowering.
Super empowering. And also using that information, to help you make an informed choice. So if IVF feels like something that's right for you, maybe lay the groundwork for 3 months before you do it to increase your chances, right? Change your diet, get acupuncture, do these things that will lead up to that and give you, a higher chance of success. If you could change the landscape before, they harvest your eggs and reimplant them, you have a much better chance.
Yeah. So let's talk about nutrition. Like we talk a lot about this on podcasts and everything, but I'm curious what your view is of like your pre-fertility year, like not pre-fertility, because most of our listeners are in 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So can you kind of give, if we were to take that chunk of time and kind of how you view nutrition to support fertility, including that, hey, after you go through menopause, there's like, your estrogen goes down, you're more confident in your creative abilities. The patriarchy will tell you you're done. However, I tell my clients, this is like a birth canal to like growing into your like, and again, by creativity, everyone, I think of creativity as a way of thinking. I don't think of it just as painting, of singing, and that can be a huge outlet as well. But to me, it's a way of thinking and a way of being in the world. So I know that's kind of a broad question, but I'd love to hear what your ideas are and what you've seen help in those different phases.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, like I'm trained in Chinese medicine, and oh boy, I got my degree, my master's in Chinese medicine about 15 years ago. And going into Chinese medicine school, I had been a vegetarian for almost 10 years. I started in my teenage years and followed it and then went into Chinese medicine school. And within Chinese medicine, there's a lot of focus on animal proteins, specifically red meat and bone broths, in the historical text as being very nutrient dense and good foods for pretty much anyone's constitution. But in studying women's health and fertility and pregnancy and all of these hormonal imbalances, it was a big part of it. Sometimes even animal products ending up in formulas to really change a hormonal imbalance. Things like deer antler, traditionally using placenta. We don't do that anymore, but unless it's your own placenta. But, so this really changed my like, okay, there's a place for animal proteins in nutrition. And it kind of like opened my world. And I, at the time, was also experiencing pretty severe hormonal symptoms. I felt like there was a lot of acne and a lot of pain around my period, a lot of irritability. And it was amazing. Like within a couple months of introducing animal protein into my diet, like it was like things were just gone. Like I just felt like myself again. And I was young, I was in my 20s, but I had energy like I had never had before. I was sleeping better. My skin was clear. I was like, wait, this is the only thing I've done differently. So that kind of set me on a path of like, similar to your passion, I believe, whereas like, nutrition is amazing. Like the stuff we can do with what we choose to put in our bodies and buy at the grocery store is so amazing at how it can heal ourselves. So I tend to be, when I'm working with, clients struggling with fertility in the sense that they're trying to conceive, I do strongly suggest animal products in a lot of those clients, but I will, of course, work with, vegetarians or vegans who continue down that path. But I do find the most nutrient-dense foods are more of a traditional way of eating. So similar to like Weston Price, if any of you are familiar with that, but animal proteins, organ meats, bone broths, kind of these foods as being the foundation of our fertility. They feed the hormones, and then healthy fats too, which can come from, animal or vegetarian sources, but really rebuilding the fat, nutrient, protein profile for women is amazing for balancing the hormones. And I also find if they've been on birth control for any length of period of time that leads to nutritional deficiencies, especially in the B vitamins, you can regain that back really quickly by adding in some pastured, grass-fed red meat or, grass-fed bone broth. It just replenishes the body so much after being on birth control.
I love that you share that because I have so many clients. I've figured out why people have conflated vegetarianism and veganism with health, because I use a methodology that there isn't one diet best for everyone. However, some people do really well on a vegetarian and vegan diet, and they tend to be what we think of as like they're the thinner, taller people, what our culture holds up as health, right? Which is they conflate health and thinness, right? So everyone's like, oh my God, it's, and vegetarianism is healthy because we're conflating thinness and health, which aren't, they're not correlated if we look at the research. And I just have so many clients who've come back to life when they've tried being vegetarian and they wish they could be vegetarian. I wish I could be vegetarian.
Yes.
It's just not. And I tried it in college as well. Oh, I was eating all those like Morningstar, like soy dogs.
Me too.
I was like, I'm so healthy. Oh my God.
Bacon or whatever.
Yeah. But the animal protein and fat, it is where I'm running Truth with Food right now. And one woman was like, oh my God. In all my years of food planning, like fat has been a no-no. And she's realizing adding it into her diet, she's like, I can function in the afternoon again. I'm like, exactly. It's such a
happy.
Yeah. So is that what you think is the main thing, is adding in bone broths and I'm assuming grass-fed, pasture-raised?
Yes, for sure, because that's going to have all the extra nutrition, whereas factory farmed, big agro meats are just going to be more inflammatory and lower in nutrition. Similar to your, local organic beet is going to have more nutrition than one that came from across the world. Like it's the same kind of idea with the meat. So yeah. I mean, I see it makes such a huge difference, especially during when you talk about fertility being reproductive years. So when a woman is cycling, I do think there is more opportunity, obviously depending on constitution and case, for vegetarianism being easier, like post-menopausal for some, for some women. Like it's a different landscape then. There's a different rhythm and different nourishment needs. So you kind of look at the different phases based on what is going on.
Well, if we think of, I like thinking of things in seasons. Like if we think of like 0 to 20 is kind of like the spring of your life. And then like 20 to 40 to 50 of the summer, like you need that fiery, young meat to like power you through like those building years, I guess. So then what shifts in like perimenopause and menopause as that in that transition before we get to post-menopause? Like what do you see being really supportive for women who are in that menopause transition?
Oh, it's so individualized for that transition because the symptoms are like, some women go through it without a bat of their eye and other women get put through the ringer with pretty debilitating symptoms. So it really depends. But I do find that women who have had a history of some sort of disturbance in their cycle, whether they were actually diagnosed with something like endometriosis, or they just had irregular periods or painful periods or a lot of PMS or something that was like really traumatic for them, physically, and then also probably also emotionally at some point, they tend to have a tougher time with that transition. So prevention is the best medicine in my mind, and paying attention to your cycle and getting things under control, knowing that PMS and cramps are not just a normal part of being a woman, and they're actually a signal from your body that there's some imbalance, and taking care of that and learning to tune into your signals will be your best medicine as you transition through menopause, because you'll be able to then tune into your hormones at that point and make choices, based on that.
But are there any things, and I know it's very individual, and I know even it's very culturally individual, like not a lot of other women in other cultures have the same struggles as American women, because our adrenals and our whole system is taxed, right? There's no social safety net. This is not a country of family values. That's the illusion. Go to Sweden, which is the most feminist country that we have. You go there, you will see a country that values families. And so I just want everyone, as we're listening, we're always looking at the political structures here. And by politics, I mean power, not partisan. Got to emphasize that. But this country is not a supportive country for women on any type of level. And so we have to recognize that. And the more that we can see those structures, the more we can say, like, no wonder I need support, or no wonder I need to pay attention to this, because no one's going to do it for me,
Yeah, no, totally.
So, but are there even self-care practices, or like getting more sleep, or like, are there things that can help people through that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say any self-care practice would be awesome. And really tuning into your own intuition. You kind of alluded to this in the beginning, but menopause is very much like a spiritual birth or a spiritual awakening for many women. And, not all the time, but certainly often when there is significant discomfort, it's kind of your way of shedding and growing. And it's just, not that you need to exist with the discomfort, but there is meaning behind it. There's opportunity to understand a little bit more. There's opportunity for growth and moving through it. In my experience, the best, way to cope through struggle, whether it's physical or emotional, is getting very clear about your self-care and prioritizing it. Like it's, just as important as showing up for work or, whatever else you need to do in your day. It's not negotiable. And finding that practice and sticking to it will certainly help dissolve some of the symptoms surrounding it, but also get you more clarity on what's underneath them, so that you can really start rebuilding from that root and seeing that go. So yeah, self-care. So that would be nourishment focused, typical. I don't necessarily see menopause as like there's specific foods that women need to eat. It's not as much as fertility, like you really need nutrient density unless there's like a significant amount of deficiency. But, cutting out sugar, flour, there's a lot of blood sugar changes that happen during menopause and post-menopause. And a lot of women find that they really don't do well with as many carbohydrates and sugars. So it might even be really cutting back your grains and your pastas and things like that, not just like cupcakes and cake and sugar and, cookies and things, but actually, having more of a protein, vegetable forward diet can really be helpful during that transition and just stabilize the blood sugar, which then balances all the other hormones.
Yeah. Again, looking at things metaphorically, a lot of the work I do with clients is transitions in general, have them quote, fall off the wagon. And, I don't believe there is a wagon. I help them see that there isn't, but that transition from work to home, from like week to weekend. And I think it's so important that what you're saying is like, during that transition, you're going to want to rely on the same coping mechanisms you have. If you haven't worked on transitions before that, this is like going from work to home, like on steroids, right?
Yes. Yes. And we all get the opportunity to have these transitions, and so like you said, like maybe you haven't had much moments in life to have this challenge in this way for you, and it's showing up now, right, in the menopause years. That could be your spiritual awakening transition or whatever.
Yeah. And I think it's really important for women listening is like Erin said, to look at your diet, but also find the self-care that's going to work for you. And I define self-care very differently. Like I'm thinking like, what are the patterns that are keeping me stuck? All that stuff. It's a great time, but it's also slowing down, getting sleep, whatever works for you. But I like what I heard you saying, Erin, is like discernment, like know, like what do we shed? What do we not? Like, what are we keeping? What are we not? Almost like the follicular phase of, of the period, right? Like what's going to be dropped? What are we shedding? You know, it's that fall season in a way that I love fall. Fall is glorious to me.
I love fall too. It's always very difficult for me though too, which is
well, it's melancholy. Like, I've learned to
all the stuff comes up and I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
Got to deal with it before winter.
Yeah, exactly. And then any thoughts on, you mentioned sometimes people's diets. I think that's really interesting just to know your diet may shift after menopause, but it sounds like it's more of the yin foods or I mean, not the real yin foods like alcohol and sugar and, you know, processed stuff, but more, you might be able to go vegetarian then, but do you still think the healthy fats are important or?
Yes, healthy fats are always important. And being careful, like especially post-menopause with carbohydrate load is the biggest thing. So if you're going vegetarian, making sure that you're not just eating, a lot of vegetarian cuisine can end up being high in carbohydrate, which can be difficult in that landscape, you know, for certain individuals. So, you know, just be mindful of that is a big one. But also like, I mean, you can have, if you want to get really specific, you can have different nutritional, you know, tendencies in the phases of your cycle too. So like learning where you might be better served to have warmer foods, more animal proteins, you know, versus in the follicular, that would be like the post-ovulation phase versus the follicular phase is a little bit easier to tolerate more salads and bright foods and bitter foods and fruits and citrus and, you know, nuts and seeds and things like that. So it's like, you can look at the month of your cycle, you know, as a rhythm that you can also tap into and follow and make choices about your nourishment for that. And then you can take a bigger look at the full spectrum and look at, okay, what's best, you know, during, you know, reproductive years and what's best during the transition into menopause and all that. So it's like, there's always a rhythm happening. It's just how closely we were looking in.
Yeah. Well, it's like if you learn on the month to month level, and for everyone listening, we did an episode with Nicole Jardem, season 2, episode 4, that goes really into detail about the foods and how to adjust based on the cycles. And Erin has such a big picture view of things. I wanted to bring her on for the bigger picture of like emotional and spiritual as well. But I love what you're saying. It's like, if we can get those in the smaller tests and I call them tests and experiments, but if we can pay attention to those smaller cycles, we can then extrapolate that out to the bigger ones and say, okay, this is what's working. That's what I think is so mysterious and amazing about nature. Like the patterns are always there if you know how to look for them. And it's just about having the X-ray vision to say, this is what's happening.
And also, like you said earlier, like being able to have the vision to see it, but then also to trust yourself enough that you actually know what to do. I see that all the time where it's like women are intuiting what they need to do, whatever it is they're coming to me for on their, you know, hormonal journey. But they're just so afraid to do it because they don't want to do it wrong, or they don't know if they're right, or maybe they want to talk to an expert, or it's like someone else will have the information they need. And I love that you mentioned that at the beginning of this podcast. And I feel like, you know, a little bit of my work is teasing out, just getting them to trust and not look for answers outside themselves so often, that they actually already know a lot of it.
They do. It's just, God, our culture is, you know, built on this idea that women are inferior. And so you are really it doesn't mean it's impossible, but you do it in the smaller ways so that when big life choices and transitions happen, you have built up that self-trust and that self-knowing to know yourself so that you can then build resilience to trust yourself even more instead of going more down a different path. It's definitely matrixy. Like it is, I mean, I feel like I'm really out of the matrix and I'm like, oh, that's the clue you're still in the matrix when you think you're out of it. Right. So it's like, you know, oh my God, Allie, there's still things you need to unlearn. But it gets easier and easier because even though you kind of go through that same mystery, like, is this going to work? Is it not? Each time you can look back and say, I trusted before and it worked out. I just know this place better. And of course, it's for bigger returns. It tends to be each time. So let's gears then in terms of I want to look at the emotional and spiritual levels of how you view fertility, because in Eastern medicine or Eastern wisdom, to me, medicine and wisdom are kind of the same things, but you can correct me because I'm clearly not an expert. It seems to me that fertility is about receiving as much as we're growing new things. I'd love to get some of this unexplained fertility. My hunch is that we're not eating enough fat and protein, animal proteins and fats. And I also think it's the emotional patterns and the spiritual patterns. Again, everything is usually multifactorial. You're never just going to be like, oh, take a vitamin D supplement. You're going to be pregnant. You're going to be creative.
Sometimes that works, but yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Those are the outliers, I'm assuming.
Right.
But what is your lens on someone who really wants a baby in the worst way, but there's unexplained things and IVF doesn't work, or because you hear all these things of, I mean, I've heard, and again, they're probably the outliers, but people being really grasping for a child and then they kind of, it's not going to happen. And then a couple years later, they're pregnant. So I'm curious, I mean, there's some unattachment going in there, but what do you see are some of the themes on the emotional and spiritual levels of fertility flow being blocked or stagnant?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like that's probably the main reason that I focus so much on working with fertility clients, is because there's so much just emotional stuff that comes up, and I'm constantly trying to find new ways to work with it. I don't necessarily claim to have all the answers on it. But what I've noticed is that, so I think as women, like generally speaking, most of us are dealing with some level of, negative self-talk and dealing with feelings of like unworthiness or insufficiency, or, perhaps part of us is broken or we're not good enough or whatever, however that translates into our life. It could be even in small ways, right? But what I've noticed is that when a woman is trying to get pregnant, and sometimes it can happen the first month she's trying to get pregnant, so she hasn't even discovered if it's going to be difficult yet. And sometimes it can be after, 2-3 years of trying and still not having a baby. But it's like this negative self-talk gets completely amplified. And so in addition to really, really wanting a baby, there's so much just self-sabotaging emotionally that women are doing to themselves when they're trying to get pregnant, that it is somehow a reflection of them, not doing things right, not being good enough, not eating right, not thinking the right things, to the point where a common thing that I see in women trying to get pregnant is like this idea that if they convince themselves they don't really want it, then it'll probably happen. Or if it doesn't, they won't be disappointed. So what that actually does is it doesn't prevent disappointment, but it just creates all of this internal emotional stagnation because they're trying to deny themselves wanting something they actually really, really want. And so they're not speaking about it. It can be very isolating. They won't tell their friends or their sisters or their mothers or their, obviously their partners probably know, but, they're not involving people to support them. So it's like the perfect storm of just feeling really, really, really bad about yourself, and also really, really bad that you can't figure out how to make this dream come true. And so what I try and do when I see that happening is, yes, we can set the foundation. They can go on the path of nourishing their fertility with all of the, things that we talked about. But I want to help them fix how they talk to themselves, because it's really just a pattern that was already existing. And now is an opportunity. It's where it's really magnified to actually move through it so that they can enjoy, a different level of satisfaction with their life, whether it's through the fertility journey or the motherhood journey or whatever the next journey is, because they're going to be in better conversation with themselves.
Yeah, I look at like the inner critic and the negative self-talk from a food perspective, and the lens that I look at it through is actually this inner protector side of ourselves when we feel at risk. So it's not necessarily all the thoughts we're thinking, it's the side of us that doesn't want to be emotionally at risk. And I think there's such this loaded thing of if you can't get pregnant or if you want to and you can't, like that role, there's definitely a loss there, but it's also society tells you you're here to be a mom, right? And it's like, wait a second. First of all, that is not true. You are a person in and of yourself, and you have personhood regardless of your relation to another person. And I think that's part of the loss is like, this was the expectation that and again, how do we'll never be able to suss out completely what's cultural expectations. Because I know some women who know that they don't want kids and they're like clear on that and it's totally cool. I know more of my friends are on the fence than not, but then I know people who really want it for those reasons. But it's just got to be so challenging if society has geared you towards this, even if it's part of what you want, which most people do want that. I'm not saying it's all society's wants, but there's this, oh my God, what is my identity? Because people will tell women who don't want kids that they're selfish. And I'm like, there's all these like negative connotations where I'm like, oh my God, like with the environmental catastrophe happening, American children are not exactly the most selfless thing to be having right now. Yeah. And I say that with like, a compassion.
No,
but there's these like, I think there's multiple things happening. There's loss. There's, oh my God, it's me. But teasing out where it really isn't about you, where it's really not your fault, I guess is my point.
Yes,
it's really hard.
Really hard. Yes, it's really hard. And it also, I believe, stems with a little bit of the fact that we're so out of touch with our fertility until we want a baby. And so what I'm curious about is if we actually start, educating teenagers about their menstruation and what is actually happening versus telling them if you have sex ever, you will get pregnant. So just don't have sex. That's not actually educating them on the power of their body and what it is doing every month and how can we look into it, and then, doing that with women again in their 20s so that they can make educated choices about their own, method of contraception but also tap into their own health. And if you can get really confident with your own hormonal landscape, this becomes less of an overwhelming situation when you want to have a baby, if you want to have a baby, right? But there's benefit, in my opinion, to tuning in and learning your own cycle's rhythm as early as possible for many, many reasons other than wanting a baby later. It serves you in many ways.
Ooh, yeah. No, I really like that. And after menopause as well, there's still cycles and rhythms, right?
Yes. Tuning in, it's extremely helpful and empowering.
Yeah. So another angle on the emotional question, do you think there's any ever emotional root causes that women can't get pregnant from? Not just the self-flagellation or the beating themselves up and, that's something I'm dealing with right now. Like, did I wait too long? I'm 39 and, it's like you can really go to town on beating yourself up and stuff like that. But are there other emotional reasons you have seen? Like, I would love if you could share any client stories of like,
for sure.
Blocks and then what happened?
Yeah. Well, like kind of like the client that not the client, but the scenario you mentioned where like they try forever and then they stop trying and then they get pregnant like 2 years later. And it's like, I wonder if there was just some level of deep acceptance of who they are, right, during those 2 years and that unwound a little bit of whatever the tension was. Could be a possibility. I don't know. You have to follow them. But like I've had this happen with several clients and that's, when they go back to their doctors and they're like, you told me I'd never get pregnant. Look at me. I have a healthy baby, and I love those stories when you just know the whole picture. But I believe that we have that our innate intuitive guidance system is intricately linked to our hormonal system. So certainly not all hormonal symptoms are caused by, that's not to say that your hormonal symptoms are caused by a lack of connection to your intuition, but if you can connect to your intuition, you can dissolve the hormonal symptoms from the root because you can get clearer about what you need. And then when your symptoms are gone, you can use this rhythm that's happening in your body to make decisions about your life. I mean, there's even scientific studies that are showing that women, end up choosing the wrong life partner when they're on birth control because their hormones are off and so their pheromones are different and they're like, wait, why did I choose this person? Like on a very animalistic level, right? Not on like is this a good person, cognitive level. So, kind of really, so what I see answering your question is that if women, as they start to nourish their hormones, see symptoms change, potentially get pregnant, they start to awaken to a new part of themselves and a new awareness within themselves. And sometimes this can be, as simple as like, oh, I've been eating the wrong foods and now I'm eating the right foods and I feel completely different and better. And sometimes it can be, wow, I'm in the wrong marriage, or I'm living in the wrong city, or I'm doing the wrong work. I went to the wrong education. Like, it could be big, big things. And I've seen this happen sometimes under my care, and sometimes we get as far as we can and then they're off. And then I hear from them 5 years later and they're, living on an island with a new man and have a baby. Like, this happens. You have to go on your own journey. So, like, I have a particular client that comes to mind who I had worked with for 3 years to help get her pregnant. And I treated her and I treated her husband, and they both were like, quote unquote, normal as far as Western medicine was concerned. They took all their supplements. They were like ideal patients, and nothing happened. And eventually after 3 years, they stopped coming to see me. And then she called me 2 years later and was like, Erin, I woke up after I stopped seeing you and I realized that I didn't like my life at all. And like, her and her husband divorced amicably. She ended up taking like a job that she wanted versus the job that she should have, took a huge pay cut, but like loved her life. She moved to the South where she wanted to be in the sunshine. We were in New York at the time, in the sunshine with greenery, met a new man, and now has like a healthy 2-year-old, and without even trying, and she was convinced that she was completely defective and completely broken, and it was completely her fault, and she would never get pregnant or carry a baby. And I don't know, but that I don't know that I can help her get to that emotional level of awareness quickly, right? It happens at a different pace for different people. So you have to be open to it. You take steps on your journey and you find it out. And I think that's where also learning to be comfortable in your own skin, learning to love yourself along the way will, while you're trying to have a baby, will help you get there quicker and see where maybe you've been deceiving yourself in some way, or where there's emotional stuckness that you're not allowing yourself to see, where perhaps you're not being vulnerable with yourself or with, people in your life where you need to be, so that you can be more open to that reception. So absolutely. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I love it. And I'm always saying to my clients, our work is it's about alignment, right? It's not right or wrong or whatever, because everyone's different and like everyone's got to live their own lives. And, I see some people's lives and I'm like, oh my, that looks so amazing. And I'm like, oh, but like to travel all the time. I like don't do well with travel. Like I need a routine, or other people might see my life and be like, oh my God, what is she doing over there? Like no one understands, oh my God, I'm so glad I have a pension and a paycheck every, there's no right or wrong.
There's no right or wrong.
And it's about alignment. And I think what's tricky about this, and again, I'm looking at it through the lens of my work, is we have this protective side of ourselves that's actually very defensive. And a lot of my clients would never think of themselves as defensive people, but think of it as on guard, right? That a lot of that self-monitoring, it's not self-awareness, it's I'm monitoring myself, is to not be at risk. And so you really conflate what other people want with what you want because you've just been looking outwardly. And that's something that, again, our culture grooms women for. And then there's not, in the beginning, a whole lot of incentive to figure it out until you start getting health issues or you hit upon something like infertility and there's no new growth there. And you're like, why do I keep feeling like people will say, I feel like I'm dying inside, often they use that metaphor, but I think it's if we look at it through a fertility lens, it's like things aren't getting nourished. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but what I hear you saying is like the more aligned you get, the more life is going to unfold. And I want to make this clear too. It popped into my head because I think sometimes in the wellness world, it sounds like if you're in alignment, everything's going to work out exactly as you want it to, right?
Or that you're like all of a sudden arrived at your forever happiness.
Yeah. And that is not true. I always reference the spiral staircase with my clients on this podcast. And, I just want people to realize if you're struggling with fertility right now, or you're in menopause and you're going through it and you're like, this is not about being unaligned and all that stuff. You could be perfectly aligned and still be going through a gritty experience. And so I just want everyone to hear, like birth. Birth is not I've never done it, but from what I hear,
yes,
it's a joyful time and it's a dig deep type of thing. So whenever I hear like high vibes or, you attract your vibe, attract your tribe or whatever this kind of, it's like, that's not how it works. Sorry. You can.
No, that's a
Have you
great
seen that too?
analogy. I have 3 children, and so I had 3 home births, and it's a thing that I love because I was a doula for 10 years, and so I just felt like when I went into my first birth, I was like, I am so prepared. This is going to be just orgasmic and an awesome experience, and I'm going to love it. And let me tell you, I did not at all. It was hard and it was fine. I mean, I was home. I didn't have to go to a hospital. Everyone was fine, but it was no part of that for me was easy. And every time I kept thinking it was going to get better. And you know what? It just didn't. It was just really hard and really painful. And I had no choice but to go through it. Like there was no get out of jail free. And, I don't know, maybe I have some deep seated emotional blockage that if I could have done that, I would have had an easy birth. I don't know. But I like that you say that there's no doing it perfectly and then getting, everything to be smooth. It's like we all have to go through it together. And if you can find for our whole lives, right, you have to go through it. If you can find tools that help you when it's tough, then it'll just make it that much easier to get through the tough points.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Cause I think, I've seen those books on like orgasmic birthing or whatever. It's like, and I feel like the quote unquote natural way now that it's really trendy because, celebrities are doing it. It's like, oh, this means that if I'm not like happy all the time, or if I'm not like drinking my perfect green smoothie and with my natural tanner and like, or whatever people are saying, I don't even know. It's amazing to me what it's like, no. If you even think about health and fertility, like there's grit there, there's resilience. Like you cannot survive without resilience. And that to me, as much as that health is as much about resilience as it is being full of life and birthing. And you can't have one without the other. And so, women, it's like, again, I always say like, I know there's a lot of women's empowerment going on. And however, a lot of it is the patriarchy dressed up with lipstick. It's just putting more pressure to have things right or wrong or perfectly or imperfect. And it's like now, and I love this fake vulnerability that people do on social media, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, oh, I was vulnerable, but then everything wraps up in a bow nice and neatly at the end of the post, right?
Yes. Not after I've already figured it out. So
yeah, not that I'm assuming after birth, you're just like in blood and you're like, this is a mess. And
yes. And it hurts and you can't sit for a week. And I mean, it's not glamorous. It's not. For me, it wasn't. For some people it is. But yeah. No, you're right. I know one of my closest fertility teachers, he told me, women used to get pregnant like, on the front lines during severe famines and times of chaos. And it's like the body, you're right, it has a grit, it has a resiliency. It's not about like doing everything perfect. And yes, there are certain nutrients and we need to be aware of these things, but like there's also other stuff going on that we don't have control over. And so we have to surrender to that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think this kind of comes full circle to the beginning where you were talking about people want to rush into things, right, rather than giving things time. If we give ourselves time, we know that health is about overtime, right? It's about the patterns that we do over the long haul. It's not the night you go out and have chocolate cake. And I think it's hard to trust that our body's resilient if we've always been battling food, if we've battled our health, if we've had hormonal issues, if we've struggled with fertility or, whatever health, if we struggle with depression and anxiety. But it's because our culture looks at all that as pathology rather than symptoms. But if you can say like, hey, what's the message here? And I get that that's hard. Like, I'm not trying to say that that's easy, but it can birth you into a new understanding of your power. And by power, I mean choice, not like oppressive power. Yeah. Well, I feel like once you get out of the matrix, out of it enough, you have to use a completely different vocabulary because everything has to be redefined, right? It's like, okay. In an unhealthy culture, power means like I have power over you. In a healthy culture, power means choice and collaboration and co-creation. So one last question before we wrap up. What about the spiritual metaphor of fertility and menopause as well? I know we've kind of gone all over the map, but I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
The spiritual metaphor of fertility, like what it means for a woman.
Yeah. Or like, and even like as women go through menopause and out the other end, like what is the spiritual work in each of those time periods?
Great question. And I feel like the theme that is coming to mind for the whole gamut of basically like women's hormonal health is trust as like the big one, and really learning to surrender into your own hormonal rhythm and wherever you are at, and trust that there is a wisdom to it that is serving you. And if you are experiencing discomfort, I think it's really easy to go into the mindset that your hormones are against you, right? And that your body is doing something wrong and you need to find a way to fix it, and you need to go get answers outside of yourself to fix it. And, that may or may not be true. But the real test, in my opinion, is despite those discomforts that might be there, or if you're trying to get pregnant and that discomfort, to lean in and find the trust in your body, because it is ultimately always trying to move towards health. And fertility, like making a baby, is health, right? And that doesn't mean that if you can't make a baby, you're not healthy, but that trusting that your body is always moving in service of the best health for you. And that a symptom is a signal that something, is blocking it. And so get curious about that and get community to help you figure out how to dissolve that symptom, but don't lose faith and trust in your body at that expense. That's like my kind of biggest one. And if you can have that relationship with your body, then you will have a lifetime of access to your power, right? So that you can make your own choices about your own health, because you will have that deep-seated trust. Even if you need a surgery or to take herbs or to completely change your diet or do something really drastic to get the symptom to go away, you will have your center and that ultimate trust in your body. And that to me is like more than anything. And as women, we have an incredible opportunity because of our hormonal rhythm to constantly practice tapping into that.
I love that. I always joke that like the spiritual quest of my lifetime is to trust my own timing. Like I'm always like wanting to get ahead, or like if I, and trusting. I think for a lot of clients and people listening, they tend to be high achievers. Like racing against time has gotten us a lot of great things, right? But there comes a time in your life, what was working is no longer working. And I think trusting yourself, and what I'm hearing what you say with hormones is it's trusting the cycle, right? And cycle is timing and all that stuff. And I think that's really beautiful and important for people. And I like that you said get in community, because I think that's another big part of, rather than shutting down, which can facilitate more stress. And I also just want to put a plug for reaching out to people who are going to guide you to your answers, like you, not people who are going to put you on a formula or a plan. I know that that's when we're the most vulnerable, right? It's the same thing with dieting. People don't want a plan. They don't want a diet plan. They want certainty. And that is, the diet industry knows that. They prey on that. But the same with Western medicine, it's big business to rush you into IVF or to get you a hysterectomy. And that's not my domain, so I don't know intricacies. But I think what you're saying is if we can get ahead of it in terms of just tuning in now and working with people who will give you, will bet on you. I always say bet on yourself. Like with the right guidance, you can figure it out. But I would put a plug in for that as finding people who will help you find yourself and your center. I love that you said that finding your center. I think most people realize that they don't need everything to go right as long as they're attached to that center, right? You start to realize
the right choices for yourself. And you're right. And choosing the team of people around you that helps you, that supports that process, because it's a lifelong process. You're never arrived and now I know myself. Like it's daily practice. So you're never done. I don't think, anyways.
No, you're not.
So it's like getting comfortable with that and then recruiting the team, and then you can make choices, whether they're low intervention or high intervention. It's not really about that, but it's making it from the right place, not out of fear or like you said, like a quick fix, but tuning in and what does your body need and what do you feel is the right call?
And I like that you mentioned that sometimes high intervention is the right choice, because this is not, I've never been like, oh, all natural. Because to me, the people who want to do everything all natural is just as dogmatic as the people who just want you to drug yourself. It's like, wait a second, life is mysterious. Fertility is mysterious. But I think what you're saying is if we find our center, we can go best in prepare. We can go in to be the best prepared for whatever unfolds. And so fertility is such a highly individualized choice. There's no right or wrong. And it's just important that you're following your truth, I think, at the end of the day.
Yes, agree. I hope people question my herbal formulas just as much as they question a prescription from their doctor. It's like, you've got to take both. One isn't better than the other, but you've got to tune in and see, well, what is it that I want to, what is it that I need? What is it that feels like the right next step for me? Because that is powerful. That will augment whatever formula or whatever prescription you take, that, self-awareness and self-confidence. So, yeah.
It just popped into my head that I want to ask you one more question. I'm always like, I was called One More Time Allie growing up because I always wanted one more lick of ice cream, one more ride on the slide. But as you were saying that, how do you tap into what's right for you? Because when I was first trying to tap into what's right for me, I would feel like I had to answer right away. And then and I would always pick again, this started with me unlearning dieting and exercise, but I used to pick the striving choice, the challenging choice. And I have since learned that when I have to let everything settle for a couple of days, because then my real intuition versus that frightened part of me, right? We're always going to have the fear-based part it just gets smaller and smaller. And then the trusting side gets louder and louder. But I would love to hear your opinion. And for listeners, what I've learned works for me is letting a choice sit for a couple of days, getting the information, whatever it is, letting it, I say wash over me, processing, whatever. And then not what makes me feel contracted and not what makes me feel I'm holding my breath, but that just right, okay, this is what it is, versus that gearing up that I used to do with diets or exercise. It's more oh, this fits like a glove. It may be a little pushing my edge, but it's not so much that I'm going to end up, biting off more than I can chew. Because when you're drawing that metaphor to decision-making processes, as you get more information, you will start to make different choices versus going to the extreme. But also, if it's something feels contractive, I always tell my clients, what feels expansive in your body? Not super expansive, but what feels that's interesting. And that's something I want to pursue. So that's my process, but I'm curious what yours is.
I love that. Definitely part of that. I feel like waiting to make a choice is my best ally, for sure, in just having that clarity. And oftentimes I feel like the voice was actually there, in the moment, but I never would have listened to it, for some reason. But I'm getting better at being oh, I know what I should do, but I'm still going to wait 2 days to make sure, got to be careful. But I also feel and especially when it comes to fertility, I think it's important. So and there's different seasons. So for me right now, as a mom of 3 little kids, my time is incredibly slim, and I'm working and all these things. So to me, when I feel I need to get back on my intuitive center, self-care practices that I can do at home in a short period of time, meditation for 5 minutes a day. If I just commit to that for a week, something completely shifts, and I'll get really clear on something. But it has to be easy versus before I had kids, and I was a little more, I had a lot more freedom, but I was also, a little more curious and a little more uncertain about even my own physiology. It was super helpful to, have appointments. So I would go to massage therapists and go to acupuncturists and herbalists and naturopaths and homeopaths and, maybe even midwives too. And I was just gathering information, but also support was really, really helpful of me getting out of my own head. So rather than sitting around trying to meditate and not be anxious, it was helpful for me to go see someone, get their perspective, and then go see someone else, get their perspective, and allow my own curiosity to digest, information and be oh, that really sat well, that really didn't. I want to know more about that, and just kind of being curious to learn more about your own physiology, but then also your own kind of process of finding your intuition and finding your confidence. So I think it depends on your life, what works for you, but that was helpful for me.
Yeah. And I think something really dynamite that you said was, in the moment, I actually got what it was, but then I just had to,
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to accept it myself. Like,
Trust.
really?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. So, Erin, where can people find more about you? How can they connect with you? Please share with everybody.
Yeah, so my website is Erin Borbet. That's Borbet, ErinBorbet.com.
Like sorbet. That's what I said.
Yes. And I do remote health coaching for women struggling with hormonal imbalance. It's all one-on-one, and we do nutrition and herbs and kind of these lifestyle things. And then I have a private clinical practice in Victor, Idaho, our small mountain town, and do house calls around Jackson Hole, Wyoming for acupuncture and herbal consultations. And I'm on Instagram as well at Erin Borbet or at Erin Borbet. And you can connect with me there or sign up for my newsletter through my website, which goes out once a month.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Erin. I've learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Allie. This is fun.
Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at allieshapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.